Well, I'm a Mrs. But okay, I need to move it now. To move the motion.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairwomanship. I am very pleased to have been able to secure this important debate today on the government's support for human rights in Kashmir and Jammu, and I would like to thank parliamentary colleagues who have joined to contribute. The complex issues faced in the region were last debated here back in 2021, and so it is vital that we have this opportunity today to highlight the challenges faced by those living in Jammu and Kashmir. I am proud we now have a Labour government who have returned the UK to its rightful place on the world stage, advocating for and working for the protection of human rights across the globe. I therefore welcome the opportunity to ask the Minister about this work and how it relates to the now Union territories of Kashmir and Jammu. When our TV screens are sadly filled with images of conflict from around the world, other international issues often fail to get the exposure they perhaps should do. And I see part of my role as a Member of Parliament to highlight areas of international concern that we should not neglect to bring attention to as we continue to support our international partners in reaching a just solution. Let us not forget that this troubled region is one of the most militarised places in the world. And ordinary Kashmiris have lived through decades of conflict and widespread abuse at the hands of state and non-state actors. The population of Kashmir remains divided between three countries, and though it is welcome elections have now been held after a 10-year hiatus, the Indian authorities have failed as yet to provide a timeline to fully restore Jammu and Kashmir's statehood. After years of delay, I applaud Jammu and Kashmir for partaking in the democratic process, despite, I am sure, feeling alienated and disempowered after decades of impasse. I also want to acknowledge to the large Kashmiri diaspora here in Britain, including in my constituency of Hyndburn and Haslingden, and their aspirations for a just settlement. As the Minister will know, human rights groups such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, as well as the United Nations, continue to highlight human rights concerns, such as the repression of the media and freedom of speech in Jammu and Kashmir, as well as the wide use of detention before trial.
For giving way. Would she agree with me that the United Kingdom occupies a very special position given our historical connections with the region? Would she also agree with me that going forward it's imperative that in all trade discussions the issue of the observance of human rights and the right for self-determination are consistently progressed by our government?
Well, friend, and absolutely, we'll also be getting to that shortly. I do agree with that being very important. So Human Rights Watch have stated that the Indian government have not fully restored freedom of speech and association since the revocation of Article 370 in Jammu and Kashmir. And I quote here from their July 2024 report. The Indian security forces continue to carry out repressive policies, including arbitrary detention, extrajudicial killings and other serious abuses. Many of these violations are enabled by legislation such as the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, Armed Forces Jammu and Kashmir Special Powers Act and the Jammu and Kashmir Public Safety Act 1978, which obstruct the normal course of law, impede accountability and jeopardise the right to remedy for victims of human rights violations.
On that point.
Absolutely.
I thank my friend for giving way, and her constituents in Hyndburn, my constituents in Walthamstow, will recognise well the title of the Amnesty report into this, which is Silence and Struggle in Kashmir. Does she agree with me that today, in what we are doing here, we are making it very clear that this government and these MPs will not allow that to be the case for Kashmir and the case for human rights in that area?
Absolutely, and I completely agree with my honourable friend. It is vital, and it's so encouraging to see so many colleagues behind me who share that sense of responsibility for ensuring that we do not stay silent on the issues that matter the most. The Armed Forces Special Powers Act remains hugely concerning, given it provides the Indian security forces with de facto legal immunity from prosecution for any human rights violation. As Amnesty have shared, there is almost total impunity for enforced disappearances, with little movement towards credibly investigating complaints. As Mary Lawler, the UN Special Rapporteur, has said, the state must respect its human rights obligations and be held accountable where it violates them. Amnesty International have reviewed the habeas corpus petitions filed to challenge detentions under the Public Safety Act before the High Court in the periods of 2014 to 2019 and 2019 to 2024. It found a 7-fold increase in the number of cases filed under the PSA after 2019, with Muslim-dominated Srinagar recording consistently more PSA cases than Hindu-dominated Jammu. As Pakistan and India work towards a bilateral resolution for peace, I wanted to ask the government how the UK is supporting this aspiration. UN Security Council Resolution 47 states that the future of Jammu and Kashmir should be decided by its own people through the democratic means of a free and impartial plebiscite. May I ask the Minister how the government will encourage the implementation of this resolution, and how will the UK government encourage the Indian authorities to comply with the Supreme Court mandating the restoration of statehood to Jammu and Kashmir? Given the evidence of ongoing human rights violations in Jammu and Kashmir, will the UK government also agree to raise its concerns in ongoing trade talks and other diplomatic negotiations with India? As part of any future UK-India trade negotiations, will the UK government support the call for the release of journalists and press for an open media environment which can function in a more meaningful way to promote a healthy democratic process? The Foreign Office last published its annual report on its activities to promote human rights abroad in 2023, and the last government unfortunately did not address Kashmir directly. Does the government have plans to publish the annual report again and reference the department's activities regarding Kashmir? I do thank the Minister for her time today. The Kashmiri community in my constituency of Hyndburn make an invaluable contribution to the life of our community, but many live with the anxiety about the future for their relatives in the region. Their hope, and one I share, is that Kashmir and Jammu will enjoy improved social and political conditions following a return to statehood, that the authorities will adopt a more humane approach to political prisoners, and that the appeal of militancy is reduced as Kashmir moves towards a peaceful resolution.
I remind members that they should vote if they wish to be called in the debates. The question is that this House has considered government support for human rights in Jammu and Kashmir. I now call Imran Hussain.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rosanna. And it's, of course, a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I firstly thank my honourable friend, the member for Hyndburn and Haslingden, for securing this very timely and important debate today. And she is absolutely right for pointing that out, that for over 70 years the people of Kashmir have suffered persecution, oppression and injustice. Their calls for justice have gone unanswered, their fundamental human rights violated and their right to self-determination repeatedly denied. They have faced enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killings and the largest military occupation in the world. Even today, mothers wait in vain for sons who never return, and wives live in perpetual uncertainty, so much so that the term half-widows has tragically entered our lexicon. This injustice has been facilitated by laws such as the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act and the Jammu and Kashmir Public Safety Act. Now, these are laws that even the Supreme Court of India describes as lawless law. These laws grant military personnel extraordinary powers to detain, arrest and even take lives without fear of prosecution. They have been weaponised against human rights defenders, journalists and political activists. Today, Yasin Malik, Khurram Pervez, Asiya Andrabi and Irfan Mehraj, as well as hundreds of others, remain imprisoned as a result of these draconian and illegal laws. not one of them has been allowed the right to a fair trial. So we must be clear in this House and call this what it is. It is not the rule of law. It is state-sponsored persecution and oppression used over 7 decades to try to silence the voice of the Kashmiris. Dr. Rosanna, in August 2019, the Indian government took the unprecedented and unconstitutional step of unilaterally revoking Article 370 and 35A, stripping away Jammu and Kashmir, stripping it of its special status. This action was not only a direct violation of international law, the commitments made to the Kashmiri people, and decades of United Nations resolutions, but it was, and let us be clear in this House, it was a blatant attempt by the right-wing Modi government to quash the Kashmiri struggle for once and for all. The consequences were devastating: 150-day communications blackout, mass detentions, violent crackdowns, and the transformation of the region into an open-air prison. Families were separated, businesses destroyed, young people denied education, and basic rights trampled upon. Yet in the face of such adversity, the Kashmiri people have shown remarkable resilience. In September 2024, in the elections last year, in September 2024, held after a decade of political repression, voter turnout reached 63%. This was not merely an election. This was a referendum in which large numbers of Kashmiris took part. And the voice of the Kashmiri people unequivocally rejected the revocation of Article 370 and 35A and demanded the restoration of the special status. Indeed, the first act of that democratically elected assembly was to pass a resolution to that effect. Dr. Razina, the question that I think is central to today's debate is, where has the international community been? Despite, frankly, the overwhelming evidence of human rights abuses, the response from the international community has been one that is deafening. While the United Nations, human rights organisations and governments worldwide have issued statements of concern, statements alone are insufficient. Action is required. This silence is not merely inaction, it sends a dangerous message that nations can suppress, oppress and brutalise without any consequences. We have a moral and historical duty to act, particularly given the role of this Parliament in shaping that region's legacy. And that's a point we can never forget. We have a duty beyond duties actually of other nations. So today I urge the government and the Minister, who is a dear friend of mine, and I know she is very passionate. Over the last decade, she and I have discussed this issue on many occasions. But what I will say to the Minister and the government today is this: we must start by moving away from the decades-old policy in this area. The policy that has been adopted by governments of all stripes. And the central point to that is this is not a bilateral issue. This is not an issue for India or Pakistan to determine, and we have to be absolutely clear at that. There is a central voice here, and that is the voice of the Kashmiri people, and for far too long, that is the voice that is being ignored. So I urge the Minister, and I do sincerely think that she will listen, and I hope she responds to that point. The other thing I want to say to the Minister is this, and whilst I support the trade agreements in that region, we cannot, in good conscience, enter into a trade agreement with India, as talks now begin, without addressing the human rights abuses in Kashmir. trade must not come at the expense of human rights, and any future trade deal with India must be conditional upon tangible actions to end these violations. These include repealing repressive laws such as the Armed Forces Special Powers Act and the Public Safety Act, restoring Kashmir's special status and upholding the Kashmiri people's right to self-determination. So I hope the Minister today will address these important points I've made, firstly with regards to the UK government's position, secondly with regards to the particular points about the trade deal. And finally, I want to say this again on behalf of the hundreds and thousands of Kashmiris in this country. Their voice will be heard. This is an important issue for them. And I want to say, as a proud British Kashmiri myself, Kashmiris stand tall, Kashmiris stand proud, and we will never bow or beg in the face of oppression and injustice. Our voices will be heard, and we will continue to make those voices loud and clear until our birthright of self-determination is granted to us. Thank you.
I would like to suggest that we try and stick to 4 minutes where possible, please. I'd now like to call Ayub Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Can I thank the member for Hyndburn for securing this important debate and for her persuasive and articulate statement, and of course the honourable member who spoke just before me. Britain has long been a beacon of justice, a nation that stood as the gold standard for the rule of law, a pillar of fairness that the world looked to in times of darkness. Our legal system has been revered globally, trusted so profoundly that even international contracts choose English courts as their final arbiters of truth. This is the legacy we inherited, a legacy of unwavering integrity, of standing for what is right, no matter what the cost. But I fear that that legacy is somehow slipping in current times. In recent years, we have seen the principles that once defined us compromised by political expediency. The fair and equal application of justice has been tarnished by the weight of economic interests, and our moral compass has wavered in the face of convenience. How can we claim to champion human rights when we turn a blind eye to atrocities that violate the very essence of international law? In Kashmir, a region bound by United Nations Security Council resolutions, yet abandoned to decades of suffering, the people of Kashmir endure a brutal occupation, their voices silenced, their rights stripped away, while we, the nation that helped shape modern international law, remain silent. In Gaza, where civilians are caught in an unrelenting cycle of violence and despair, yet our actions remain hesitant and inconsistent. And then contrast this with our swift and justified response to Russian aggression. Why do we pick and choose when to stand for justice? Why do we let economic interests decide who is held accountable and who is ignored? This is not the Britain we aspire to be. If we are to reclaim our moral authority, if we are to restore our standing as the defender of justice, we must hold all violators of international law to the same standard. That means taking a stance even when it is difficult. That means considering sanctions against nations like India for their ongoing abuses in Kashmir. It means standing resolute, not for profit or political gain, but for the fundamental human rights of every individual, no matter where they live or who they are. Justice must not be selective. Human rights are not negotiable. Let us be the nation that places international law above all else. So I ask the Minister, given the United Nations Security Council resolutions that have been ignored, what sanctions will this government impose currently to remain consistent in our legal and moral obligations? Thank you, Chair.
I'd now like to call Abdesam Mohammed.
It's an absolute pleasure to serve under your chairship, Dr. Rosanna Allen Khan, and thank you to my honourable friend for bringing this really important debate. I've had a number of constituents, and I want to pay tribute to the work that they've done in Sheffield Central on this really important issue. They have campaigned for many years to raise awareness on the plight of Kashmiris. Amnesty International has documented the repression of dissent in Jammu and Kashmir, particularly over the revocation of its special autonomous status in 2019. Quite recently, the case of Farhunda Rahman, a British Kashmiri woman who was harassed and exploited, was seen and was not investigated appropriately. And this is not an isolated case. Human Rights Watch also reported on the ongoing repression, arbitrary detentions, extrajudicial killings and restrictions on freedom of speech and assembly. And their findings emphasise the use of counter-terrorism laws to target journalists, activists and political leaders. Journalists in Kashmir face extreme levels of harassment, security forces including interrogation, raids and threats. And for many years, people have relayed back to me the constant concerns that the Indian authorities have routinely restricted and blocked internet in Kashmir, prohibited the rights of human rights defenders and impartial independent observers. We've really got to work hard to make sure that all political parties put their candidates in elections and facilitate free and fair participation, regardless of their political beliefs, for their determination of the future of a free and fair Kashmir. So my question to the Minister is, given the scale of human rights abuses, when will we move from condemnation to action, and when we will recognise that this is not a bilateral issue, and when will we hear the voice of Kashmiris and ensure that their voice is heard on the international arena? Thank you.
Tahir Ali.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's indeed... It's working now. Dr. Rosanna Allen Khan, it's indeed a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I would like to thank the member for Highburn for bringing this debate into the Westminster Hall today. 1st of January 1948 was when India went to the United Nations asking that the issue of Kashmir gets noted, and subsequently it was Resolution 47 that determined the outcome for a plebiscite.
That's right.
To this date, that resolution, 76 years on, and we're into the 77th year, has not been implemented. Now the voice of Kashmir is now asking the international community, what is it that has to happen to them before their voices are heard? When Article 37 and 35A was revoked back in August 2019 by the BJP Modi-led government, there was a silence, a deafening silence from the international community. The United Nations failed to act on that. Even earlier this week, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, has expressed concerns over human rights violations in India, particularly in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Now, the response from the Indian High Commissioner to the United Nations was that he should take a long and hard look at the mirror. Now, this is nothing but a complete disregard for the United Nations. In fact, calling itself the largest democracy, one begs to question, if it's the largest democracy, why would he not let international observers into Kashmir with unfettered access so they can observe what is happening on the ground? Why are extrajudicial killings happening under the watch of international community, where India is getting away with atrocities against women, rape, torture, even pelleting children that are making their way to school? What threat can they be? And that is all very well documented. Now, to shout the loudest and say, we're the largest democracy, nothing is happening in Kashmir. It is a blatant two fingers up to the international community to say we will continue to do what we are doing, we will continue to do what has been happening for the last 76 years, and we will take no notice. Kashmir is not a bilateral issue. It is not an issue between Pakistan and India. It's an issue for the Kashmiri people, for the right of self-determination, and it is for the international community to come together to make that happen. If it does not happen now, in the midst of global turbulence that is happening in all regions, then when is the time for the international community to come together? Peace is needed. Peace has to happen in that region. Two nuclear states cannot allow Kashmir to become the hanging fireball in the region that can explode or ignite at any time. This is an unfinished business of the UK government from 1947. An unfinished business of a Labour government in 1947. We now have a Labour government. Perhaps it is up to the Labour government, for the UK's Labour government, to take a leading role in this and make sure that that unfinished business gets dealt with for once and proper, without putting any more lives at risk, without risking any more atrocities and the genocide that is taking place in India-occupied Kashmir. Why would a country not even allow its own politicians access to the region of this conflict? Why would they not allow their own journalists access if there is nothing to hide? Back in 2020, a delegation from the APPG Kashmir went to Kashmir. All of us were denied a visa to the Indian occupied region. The chair at the time managed to get to Delhi, but she was then returned back to Dubai because she was not allowed any more access further than that. When we ended up on the Pakistan side, they allowed, it was the PTI government at the time, they allowed us unfettered access to any areas that we wanted to visit without any hindrance. We had to ask for it and we got access. In fact, we changed the schedules to make sure we went and we saw parts of that Kashmir region which were not perhaps seen by politicians before. Now, on one side, you've got Pakistan that allows international access to people, and on the other side, India is hesitant. Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to work out where the problem is. My plea to this British UK government is that unfinished business cannot remain unfinished. It has to happen now. And will the government make and take all steps to make sure that the right of self-determination is granted to the people of Kashmir?
Thank you. I'd just like to remind people that because there are so many that want to speak in this important debate, that we do need to try and really stick to the 4 minutes and keep interventions to a minimum as well. Iqbal Mohammed, please.
Thank you, Dr. Rosina Alin Khan. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And I thank my honourable friend and member for Hyndburn for securing this important debate. In my constituent of Dewsbury and Batley, I have many Kashmiris. And one of the pledges that I promised them during my election campaign was to stand up for peace, justice and human rights anywhere around the world. And Kashmir is their homeland and very close to their and my heart. A report issued by Amnesty International last year captures the reality of repression the Kashmiri population are subjected to. It describes a clampdown on freedom of expression via the use of restrictive travel bans and arbitrary detentions to intimidate critical dissenting voices from speaking out. It describes how those subject to detention under stringent anti-terror laws are now being detained much longer without trial than before. from an average of 269 days between 2014 and 2019 to now about 330 days from 2019 to 2024. This is in effect a form of internment. We know from experience of internment in Northern Ireland in the 1970s that it did nothing more than act as a recruiting agent for paramilitary organisations. If you add on top of that extrajudicial killings, police and army abuses, the Indian government's decision to strip Kashmir of its autonomy and statehood, and the draconian crackdown followed in its wake, it's not surprising the region is in constant ferment. What is surprising is how little is known about the state of affairs in this country, especially considering the historic role of the British government in the creation of Kashmir, the partition of India, and all the chaos that came in its wake. The UK have a historic responsibility for the current situation. They have a responsibility to put rhetoric about upholding human rights in practice and to use governmental pressure on India to that end. I have no illusions about the difficulties in making them act such. As the plight of the Palestinians illustrates, the UK commitment to human rights exists more in theory than in practice. Nevertheless, thanks to public campaigning, the issue of Palestine won't leave this government alone. It's like a stone in their shoe. For those of us concerned about this issue, the challenge is to make the issue of human rights and self-determination for Kashmir the stone in the other shoe. Therefore, the government must take responsibility and a leadership role as a peacemaker and enforcer of international law. What will the government do to remove the impunity it provides the Indian government for the many breaches of international and humanitarian law? What specific steps will this government take to enforce the UN resolutions already mentioned? What diplomatic engagement is the UK using to seek a peaceful resolution for the Kashmiri people and the right to self-determination? What action is the UK government taking to enforce human rights in Kashmir? What humanitarian aid is the UK government providing to Kashmir, and how will this be impacted by the decision to reduce foreign aid by 40%? Thank you.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Dr. Ali Khan. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I want to thank the Honourable Member for Hyndburn for bringing this really important debate to the House today. It is a personal issue for my constituents, and indeed for myself as well, as my great-grandparents come from Jammu and Kashmir, which is now occupied by India. United Kingdom has a historic responsibility for this particular issue. It was during the British Raj when India and Pakistan statehood was created. Kashmir, the principality, was predominantly a Muslim area. From the beginning, there had been problems regarding it as to who would run it. So in 1948, the Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, went to the UN and asked for a UN Security Resolution 47, which guaranteed that all the Kashmiris had the right to choose their future through a democratic vote. That still has not happened 76 years later. Instead, with a very right-wing Hindutva-led Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, and Hindutva is the concept of India is for Hindus first, have been in power. And since they have been in power, things have got worse for the people of Kashmir. One of the first things since 2019 the Indian government has done was to revoke Article 37, and that means the situation has gone from bad to worse. What this article and some of the others have done is split occupied Kashmir into 3 different areas. It's also allowed people who were not from Kashmir to be able to settle there. Thousands and thousands of acres of land has been now grabbed, apparently for development purposes. Yet we know that the rule is that in Kashmir, it's the Kashmiris who should be able to settle there. This is a deliberate ploy to change the demographics on the ground, so that if ever there was a plebiscite, it would probably be capped with India. Apart from that, there have been human rights abuses, such as pellet guns being aimed at children. There was a period of time where for 500 days there was no internet for the entire area, as a result of the fact that there are people being arrested, incarcerated, without due process of law, if they are critical of the Indian government. So what I would say is that India is supposed to be, we're told, the largest democracy in the world, yet in Kashmir the assemblies have been dissolved. People in Kashmir have no right to vote. So what we would ask is, Prime Minister has recently done great work on Ukraine. I would ask if the Prime Minister and our Foreign Office would actually get involved in this issue, stop treating it as a bilateral issue. It isn't a bilateral issue, and actually for once ensure that the people of Kashmir have the right to decide their destiny as to where they want to be. And as has been said by so many people already in the chamber, we talk about human rights, we talk about rule of law. I think it's about time that people in Kashmir were given their human rights. And one of the fundamental human rights is the right of self-determination.
Dr. Alison Gardner.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And I thank my honourable friend for securing this important debate today. Many of my constituents in Stoke-on-Trent South care deeply about the conflict in Jammu and Kashmir, and indeed have family there, as do many British Asians of Jammu and Kashmir descent. I have had the honour to attend several meetings in Stoke-on-Trent to discuss the ongoing conflict and human rights abuses occurring in Kashmir. In particular, I am very grateful to Raja Najabat Hussain and Tamil Shafiq of the Jammu Kashmir Self-Determination Movement International for their regular engagement with me since my election. And I wish also to thank Councillor Majid Khan and Councillor Amjad Wazir for hosting the meetings, and also Bag Ali, who first raised Kashmir with me, highlighting the ongoing issues.
Would my honourable friend give way very briefly? I'd like to echo the comments made about Majid Khan and Amjad Wazir locally. Many of my constituents in Stoke-on-Trent North have deep ties with Kashmir. Would my honourable neighbour agree with me that the work Majid Khan, Amjad Wazir and others do locally to raise awareness of the terrible ongoing human rights violations is incredibly important, as too often there's not enough understanding amongst our wider constituents about the ongoing human rights violations?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and of course I agree. I am of course aware that today we are speaking during the holy month of Ramadan. This is a time of deep reflection, and it is very apt we discuss the need for peace and resolution in this time. It is, of course, for the role of India and Pakistan to seek a diplomatic and political resolution and end to the human rights abuses, and so find a sustainable peace and self-determination of the people of Kashmir and Jammu. But I ask the British government to take an active role in mediation. And such negotiations must crucially include the voices of the Kashmiri people. And in acknowledgement of International Women's Day next week, this must include the voices of women. Academic human rights organisations and the UN rightly point out that it is often the women who are frequently the most severely affected emotionally, physically and economically. Of greatest concern is the use of sexual violence and rape, so often used as an instrument of war in any conflict. This has been used to intimidate and silence women and communities. The fear instilled in women means that the women's day-to-day existence, safety and security and mobility are curtailed. Enhanced security protocols and militarisation have an enormous negative impact on the lives of women, even reducing their access to education and, crucially, healthcare. Conflict results in the loss of husbands, either by extrajudicial killings or imprisonment, often requiring women to have to work and support their families. Hence, we need to support the economic empowerment for women as well as their physical security in Jammu and Kashmir. For peace to be secured, for resolution to be reached, I urge that the voices of women are heard in the dialogues and mediation of the Kashmiri conflict. In closing, therefore, I urge the Minister, in light of our global reputation for mediation, to do all that can be done to help secure peace and democracy and self-determination in Jammu and Kashmir for all Kashmiri people, men, women and children. Thank you.
James Frith.
Thank you, Dr. Rosanna Ali Khan. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I also thank my honourable friend and constituency neighbour for Hyndburn and Haslingden for securing this important debate on a topic that is close to the hearts of hundreds and hundreds of my constituents, and therefore are close to my heart as well. It's one I promised to involve myself in, to continue to fight for, on the doorsteps of the election campaign and my time in the House before now. I was proud earlier this year to host the first Labour Friends of Kashmir event in Bury North, bringing together friends and colleagues from across my community and further afield to discuss the important issues that we seek to address and highlight today. I'm grateful in particular to Raja Najbat Hussain and Timur Shafiq of the Jammu Kashmir Self-Determination Movement International for their engagement with me since my election, as well as Lord Wajid Khan, the Minister, long-time friend to me and Bury, and our wonderful Pakistan Kashmiri diaspora. I'd like also to place on record my thanks to Councillors Timur Tariq, Babar Ibrahim and Tahir Rafiq for their counsel on this issue. Their interactions have deepened my understanding and commitment to advocating for the rights and dignity of the people in this contested region. Because, Madam Chair, because these global issues have local resonance. Bury North is home to a proud South Asian community, and to many of them, they continue to have familial ties to Jammu and Kashmir. Their stories, their hopes, their concerns resonate deeply with our community, and it's our duty here to ensure that their voices are heard and that we stand not just in solidarity with them in these challenging times, but it means calling out the injustices. It also means moving things along to progress this for them, not to be constantly in rehearsal of the objections and the assessment, but to see progress now we are in government. As we speak on this topic today, we are also mindful of the holy month of Ramadan, a time dedicated to peace, reflection and charity. It is a period when we are reminded of our shared humanity and the importance of supporting those in need. The principles of Ramadan, as with so many values of our Abrahamic faiths, inspire us to advocate for justice and compassion, values that are essential in our discussion on human rights. Whilst this is a conflict taking place thousands of miles away, it is not one that we must or can or should turn away from. Human rights abuses, the stifling of democracy and free speech, the ongoing struggle for self-determination, historic injustices, the need for reconciliation, and with so many of these contentious issues, the UK's role originally and our role to resolve. Restrictions on free speech in the region have led to the detention of journalists, activists, political leaders under anti-terror laws. These measures suppress dissent and limit public discourse. Laws such as the Public Safety Act and the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act enable authorities to detain individuals for extended periods without trial, often without formal charges, raising concerns about legal abuses and arbitrary detentions. Extended lockdowns have had severe consequences on civilians, restricting access to essential services as healthcare, education and employment. These measures have disproportionately affected vulnerable populations, exacerbating their hardships. Additionally, religious minorities and migrant workers have faced targeted violence and repression, further marginalising already at-risk communities. And so, whilst fundamentally this is a matter for the Kashmiri people to be given their self-determination, to execute their self-determination and their rights, it is a matter for the UK to involve itself with Pakistan and India. We have a global role, a global reputation, and leadership that can inspire change we wish to see. There are verified reports from credible organisations such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch on human rights violations. The human impact on these restrictions and the testimony that we have seen and heard from affected individuals highlight the real-life injustices and consequences. And so in closing, Madam Chair, I would therefore urge the Minister to consider what more the Government can do, not simply to rehearse the assessment we understand, but to progress to resolution. The direction of this ongoing conflict, it must be to achieve peace and democracy in the region and justice for the Jammu Kashmiri people through self-determination. Finally, will the Minister confirm what this Government's objectives are for this historic and current conflict in this Parliament? The remarkable resilience by the Kashmiri and Jammu people demands action and a resolution on this matter.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Chair, and a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And can I thank, first of all, the Honourable Lady for Hyndburn and Hassington for setting the scene so very well, and to all those who have made incredible contributions. We've seen renewed parliamentary engagement on this issue, including the all-parties Kashmir conference held here in the House of Commons. So it's an indication of the strength of this, and I've spoken on this issue in the main chamber on a number of occasions. It is vital that such dialogues translate into meaningful action. I state an interest, Madam Chair, as Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for International Freedom of Religion or Belief. I speak up for those with Christian faith, those with other faiths and those with no faith, and my deep concern for the rights of all communities affected by the ongoing tensions in the region. I first of all add my acknowledgement of the deeply troubling reports of press suppression, of arbitrary detentions, of human rights concerns in Indian-administered Jammu and Kashmir. The situation for journalists in particular remains alarming. Reports suggest that some 90% of journalists working in the region have been summoned for question at least once, some repeatedly, often under intimidation from authorities, demonstrating detailed knowledge of their personal lives and their family members. These tactics create a chilling effect, deterring independent reporting, limiting the free flow of information. It remains concerning that despite multiple calls for transparency, the regional administration has failed abysmally to provide satisfactory responses. And the climate of fear for journalists directly undermines press freedom, an essential pillar of democracy, as others have said. The right to freedom of expression is fundamental to any democratic society, and it's deeply concerning that the ability of the press to operate freely in Jammu and Kashmir remains under significant threat. Beyond press restrictions, of course, we must also consider the broader security situation. Since 2021, Jammu has seen at least 33 militant-related attacks. In just the first half of 2024, 12 civilians were killed, matching the total civilian deaths of the previous year. These statistics, I believe, underscore a very worrying escalation in violence, despite claims that peace has been restored. The Indian government's revocation of Article 370 in 2019 fundamentally altered the status of Jammu and Kashmir. While officials may claim this move was to increase development and integration, reports from international human rights organisations tell a very, very different story. The arbitrary arrests, the surveillance and the oppressive environment in which journalists work are clear violations of press freedom. The BBC has documented numerous instances where citizens, particularly journalists, have been detained or harassed for merely exercising their fundamental rights of their job. And one example, Munib-ul-Islam's case, a 29-year-old photojournalist who had worked in Kashmir for 5 years. His career halted in August 2019. For over 150 days, the region was left without internet access, making India's longest ever communications blackout. Such acts of repression have only intensified since the revocation of Article 370 in August 2019, which has further suppressed independent journalism. Turning to Pakistan, because there's two parties in this, there's two countries in this. Pakistan administered Kashmir. We cannot ignore the serious human rights concerns there as well. The 2018 amendments to the interim constitution, which restricts religious freedoms for the Ahmadiyas, remain a cause of concern. Reports from human rights groups suggest that enforced disappearances continue. Freedom of expression remains under threat, with journalists facing harassment and restrictions in both Pakistan and India-administered Kashmir. I quote, as I often do in these types of debates, the biblical text of Proverbs 31 verses 9. It says, "Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and the needy." And as discussions to continue, I urge the United Kingdom Government and the Minister in particular to engage proactively with its counterparts to seek assurances that human rights will be protected. The international community, including the UK, must use its diplomatic channels to encourage both governments to uphold fundamental freedoms. allow independent monitoring by UN bodies, and ensure justice for those affected by violence and repression. The people of Jammu and Kashmir deserve a future free from violence, from repression and discrimination. It is our duty in this House to stand in solidarity with them and ensure that their rights are upheld. So let's continue to push for justice, for accountability and for lasting peace in this region. Thank you so much.
Harpreet Uppal, sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Ali Khan, and it's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, and huge thanks to the member for Hyndburn for bringing forward this important debate. As other colleagues have said, in 2019, India made the unilateral move to downgrade Jammu and Kashmir to 2 union territories, revoking Article 370 of the Constitution. A huge move which India did unilaterally as well, and which has had a huge impact on the Kashmiri people. As members have said, there was a complete communication lockdown in the immediate aftermath. But we know this continues, and there continues to be sporadic internet shutdowns to this day. The use of the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, as other members have said, have particularly been used against civil society activists and journalists. And I particularly want to mention Khurram Pervez and journalist Irfan Miraj, who have been detained without trial under the UAPA. Should also say that I have spent some time working on Kashmir with colleagues in the room here today, and we've spoken directly with civil society activists in the region and with NGOs in the region. And we know, for example, Amnesty International India had their bank accounts frozen by the Indian government. We also know the BBC had to split their news operations to meet the laws that were put in place as well. And there were serious concerns about the moves that the BBC had to take at the time. And land laws in Indian-administered Kashmir have been amended or repealed, resulting in evictions, destruction of property and land confiscation. I can't quite say it, but hopefully you know what I'm trying to say there. And more recently, just this week, there's been reports of books being seized by police. Book owners trying to go about their normal day, going about their business and having books seized. Quite a horrific example of some of the situation in Indian-administered Kashmir. I do just want to mention Gilgit and Baltistan. Obviously not the situation in Pakistan-administered Kashmir is far more open. And as the member for Bradford East and the member for Birmingham Hall Green have mentioned, I joined them on a delegation to Azad Kashmir, and we did have quite a lot of access to not just government officials but also to journalists and civil society activists, so we were able to speak to a large group of people. But I did just want to mention Gilgit and Baltistan, where there is little or no representation in Pakistan's National Assembly or the Senate for representatives in Gilgit and Baltistan. And there have been some concerns for journalists in the region. And we know there are projects like the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which has been seen as a beacon of progress for some in the region. But we know this has led to some land seizures without proper consultation. So we must ensure that the Kashmiri people and Kashmiri citizens are put at the front of any moves for their region. The right to self-determination exists within the UN through that article, and we must do everything we can to support the Kashmiri people. And as other members have said, this is not a bilateral issue. This is an issue for the international community to be involved in. And could I just ask the Minister to talk about the discussions they are having with the Indian government on trade agreements and human rights? Thank you very much.
Gareth Snell.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ali. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and can I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Hyndburn and Haslington, for securing what is, I think, the first substantive debate in this Parliament on this issue, which, given we are 7 months in, is probably something we should all reflect on as to whether we've given due attention to this quite pressing international issue, given how long it's taken to raise it. I would like to start, Dr. Ali Khan, by much like my friends from Stoke-on-Trent North and South, paying tribute to councillors Amjad Wazir, Majid Khan, Javed Nazmi and former Lord Mayor Bag Ali. When I was first elected here in 2017, they were the first group of people to come and see me, to talk to me about what was going on in Jammu and Kashmir. They told me the challenges that their families were then facing in 2017. And obviously, during that Parliament, issues escalated significantly with the revocation of Article 370 and the suspension of the basic human rights, the curfews, the discontinuation of telephone services, the suspension of the internet. And I suppose the fact that today, in 2025, we stand in this Parliament again, having this debate again, in many ways means that we have failed them. We have failed those people that I spoke to 7 years ago. We failed people like Raja Hussain and the Jammu and Kashmir Self-Determination Movement International, because we are still talking about this issue. What are we doing about this issue? What are the actions that we can say, since I was first elected 7 years ago, have happened to make this issue better for the people living in Jammu and Kashmir? And with my hand on my heart, Dr. Alan Khan, I can't honestly say that the discussions that we are having today and the arguments that I have heard so passionately from my friends and other honourable members in this chamber are actually any different to those that I would have been listening to 7 years ago. And if we're going to be having this conversation in 7 years' time, it will be a catastrophe for the people in Jammu and Kashmir. It will be a dereliction of responsibility of any government, of any political party, to allow an issue of this significance to continue the way it does without some form of intervention. And I'm afraid that my honourable friend from Bury North has temporarily left. He said in his speech that the UK has a global role and a global reputation. He said that wonderfully, but the point that I think we need to add is the UK also has a global responsibility. Because if we don't take our responsibility seriously, if we do not say, now is the time for action, the conversations, the debates, the words, the petitions, the conferences that we all attend in Portcullis House, where we rehearse the same arguments and we hear the passionate cries for assistance from the people of Jammu and Kashmir, then we will have failed to do what we as legislators in one of the most powerful parliaments in the world can do. And so I do say to the Minister, we all know of the Security Resolution 47 from 1948. We know the 77-year wait that the people of Jammu and Kashmir have had for the right to self-determination. There is a generation of people who are ageing, and they would like to see some action on this before it is too late for them. These are people who have lived their entire life in hope that the land where they and their families have come from, where they still have a deep bond and connection, is being left. And so I hope the Minister, in her summing up remarks, will be able to give some indication. And I know the Minister well. I know she is a thoughtful and diligent member of the FCDO team, and I know that these matters weigh heavily upon her shoulders. But what can we look forward to in this House that we can say to our constituents, whether in Stoke-on-Trent, in Bradford, in Birmingham, even in Strangford, to say that we are now taking action to deliver that self-determination and the human rights for the people of Kashmir that have been denied to them for the last 77 years. Thank you.
Paul War.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Dr. Alan Khan, and I do thank the Honourable Member for Hyndburn for securing this vital and overdue debate. As has been said already, while the world rightly focuses on the plight of the Palestinian people and UN resolutions frequently broken by Israel, all too often, there's too little attention on the plight of the Kashmiri people and the repeated violations of UN resolutions by India too. From repeated denials of their self-determination to frequent attacks on their human rights, the Kashmiris are truly the Palestinians of South Asia. 78 years after Kashmiris were nominally granted autonomy by the creation of Jammu and Kashmir in India and Azad Kashmir in Pakistan, many are still crying out for the self-determination they deserve. And we need to vigorously support the United Nations resolutions of not just 1948, 1949 and 1960, which upheld the rights of the Kashmiri people to self-determination through a UN-supervised plebiscite. As has already been said, we, the British, owe the Kashmiri people an historic debt of honour. We need to fulfil the explicit commitment by Lord Mountbatten, the last Viceroy of India, for a direct say for the Kashmiri people over their own future. And it's India's most recent ongoing breaches of UN resolutions that concern many of us today. Human rights groups, as has already been said, have highlighted the repression of the media and freedom of speech in Jammu and Kashmir, and the widespread use of detention without trial and internet shutdowns, all of which, as has been said, has been criticised by the high courts in India itself. As a former journalist myself, I'm appalled by the Indian crackdown on a free press. In September 23, the BBC reported journalists in Kashmir felt the Indian government was running, and I quote, a sinister and systematic campaign to intimidate and silence the press in the region. Only last month, as has been said, police in Kashmir disgracefully raided dozens of bookshops and seized more than 650 books, many of them by Islamic scholars. I know the UK government position is that Kashmir is a bilateral matter for peaceful resolution by India and Pakistan. And obviously there needs to be diplomacy and a long-lasting peaceful solution. But the voices of Kashmiris themselves should be supported by the UK and by the international community. And the UK must do much more to call out the most egregious abuses of human rights in Kashmir and demand full investigations and real action and real justice. I stand in solidarity with the people of Kashmir in both India and in Pakistan and pay tribute ultimately to their amazing resilience. But I'd like to put on record too that there's more we can do in the UK too to help British Kashmiris. Research by the University of Manchester has put Rochdale's Kashmiri population at nearly 15,000. But they're almost invisible in public policy terms. Why? Because they're not recorded separately in the census and are classed as Pakistani. So we need to recognise the Kashmiri languages and ethnicity in the census, allowing public services and other services to be properly directed to areas of need. Pahari, the mother tongue of many Rochdale Kashmiris, is not recognised on a par with other community languages used by public bodies, and many in the community feel this is one of the key factors that has led to their marginalisation. There is a democratic deficit too. Although we have many councillors and some MPs, including here today, of Kashmiri descent, not a single member of the House of Lords is a Kashmiri. I would like to pay tribute to Councillor Dalla Ali, the founding member of Rochdale's Kashmir Youth Project and of the Kashmir Broadcasting Corporation, which caters for Indo-Aryan languages in the UK, who's repeatedly raised human rights abuses back in his homeland. The Kashmir Youth Project in Rochdale was founded in 1979 and every day helps the young, the old, women and men with crucial services that show the best of Rochdale and the best of our Kashmiri community. So we should strive to improve the lot of Kashmiris in India and Pakistan and call out human rights abuses. But we also need to do much more here to help the Kashmir community at home.
I'd now like to call Liberal Democrat spokesperson Brian Matthew.
Dr. Rosina Alin Khan, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and we thank the member for Inburn and Hazelden for bringing this important debate. The Liberal Democrats are deeply concerned about the ongoing tension between India and Pakistan over Jammu and Kashmir. This is not a new conflict, it's been long and oppressive one, a conflict that affects many in the UK, particularly those in communities with strong personal ties to the region. We're concerned by the ongoing tension between India and Pakistan, two nuclear powers, and we want the UK government with the international community to play an active role in advocating for peace and reconciliation between India and Pakistan in this troubled area, and also the recognition of the human rights of the residents of Jammu and Kashmir. But it's up to both governments to undertake and to engage in a peace process that delivers a sustainable and just and lasting settlement. And our government must play a part, its part, to help find the best way forward. We are profoundly concerned by the abolition of Kashmir's special status under Article 370 by the Indian government in 2019, along with the unrest and human rights abuses that have continued. We believe the UK must use its influence to support UN inspections and engagement in Kashmir. The Liberal Democrats believe in defending human rights and equality across the globe and think that UK foreign policy should promote these values internationally. The UK must also reverse cuts to the official development assistance and ensure that aid focuses on poverty reduction and protecting human rights in places like Kashmir, where an estimated 655,000 people are living below the poverty line, with about 47% of the population living without adequate sanitation. The UK's international development spending must be used effectively, with a primary focus on poverty reduction, as we reverse the ODA cut and get back to 0.7 GNI. Putting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals at the heart of our international development policy, including access to clean water, sanitation and health, and to quality education and achieving food security. The Kashmir crisis is a long-standing issue that cannot be ignored. The UK government must use its diplomatic channels to promote peace, hold human rights violators to account, and support those affected by the conflict. We stand for a peaceful, just, and humanitarian approach to resolving the situation and helping to build a better, more prosperous future for the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Thank you.
Now let's call Opposition Spokesperson Wendy Morton.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Dr Alin Khan. And let me start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Hyndburn for securing this important debate today on human rights in Jammu and Kashmir, which has clearly attracted a lot of interest from colleagues in the House this morning. This is a deeply sensitive and complex issue that has persisted for decades, and one that requires careful and measured discussion. And I think it's fair to say, Madam Chair, we have seen that displayed today in Westminster Hall from honourable members here today. Of course, naturally, given our history in the region and the role that the United Kingdom played in the partition of these territories, many look to us to mediate. It was not the policy of the last government to prescribe a solution to the situation in Kashmir, as this is for India and Pakistan to find a lasting political resolution, one that takes into account the wishes of the Kashmiri people. However, we mustn't shy away from raising human rights concerns, which may arise as a byproduct of this dispute. So it's vital that allegations of human rights abuses are investigated thoroughly, promptly and independently. So I'd like to ask the Minister if she can outline how her government is pressing both India and Pakistan to ensure their domestic laws align with international human rights standards. Central to today's debate, of course, is understanding what assessment has the government made of ongoing human rights abuses in the region. India and Pakistan are both close friends of the United Kingdom, and importantly, both are members of the Commonwealth, a unique institution that does so much to foster unity between nations that share the common values set out under the Commonwealth Charter. Article 2 of the Charter insists upon a commitment to human rights, specifically the respect for the protection and promotion of civil, political, economic, social and cultural rights. Both India and Pakistan have each expressed their strong belief in the Commonwealth's role as a platform for constructive dialogue. So given this, what is the government doing to utilise the Commonwealth as a forum to encourage dialogue between India and Pakistan on protecting human rights and this geopolitical issue more generally? And what conversations has the Minister had with the Secretary-General of the Commonwealth to prevent against any potential future violations of the Commonwealth Charter? Regional instability in South Asia does not exist in a vacuum, so we must consider the broader geopolitical landscape, particularly the influence of China in the region. Continued tensions in Kashmir could create opportunities for external actors to further their own strategic interests, potentially undermining peace efforts and increasing regional instability. So it would be therefore helpful to understand what assessment has been made of the potential security implications of China's involvement in the region. And will China's role in Kashmir make an appearance in the government's China audit? A crucial part of the human rights discussion is the issue of freedom of religion and belief, which remains a concern in both India-administered and Pakistan-administered Kashmir, where religious minorities continue to face discrimination and persecution. So I'd like to ask the Minister today what assessment her government has made of the state of religious freedom in Kashmir. It was welcome news to hear of the recent appointment by the Prime Minister of a special envoy for freedom of religion or belief. But it's now important to understand if the envoy will be tasked with examining these concerns and engaging with counterparts in India and Pakistan on this matter. As we engage in this discussion, I would urge the Government to provide clear answers on how it plans to ensure the UK remains a voice for stability, dialogue and human rights in Kashmir. The people of Kashmir have endured decades of uncertainty and hardship. So what is the Government doing to prevent a further escalation of tensions? How does it intend to use its diplomatic influence to bring both India and Pakistan to the negotiating table? His Majesty's Government, through its diplomatic networks in New Delhi and Islamabad, must continue to encourage both sides to engage in dialogue and pursue lasting diplomatic solutions. But how frequently is the Government raising this issue with its counterparts in India and Pakistan? And can the Minister provide specific examples of recent diplomatic engagement on this matter? So, Madam Chair, it's with all that in mind that the UK must continue to encourage constructive dialogue, to promote and defend international law and human rights, and work towards a future that prioritises peace, security and stability in the region. Thank you.
Now call the Minister, Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alim Khan, and it's a pleasure to be serving under your chairmanship this morning. And I should begin by stating the Government's policy on Kashmir, that India and Pakistan are long-standing important friends of the UK, and we encourage both to engage in dialogue and find lasting political solutions to maintain regional stability. It's been the long-standing position of successive UK governments that it is for India and Pakistan to find a lasting political resolution on Kashmir, taking into account the wishes of the Kashmiri people. It is not for the UK to prescribe a solution or act as a mediator. However, as the member for Hyndburn and Haslingden has brought the debate today, and as members have asked about a voice for Kashmir, I want to reiterate that this is an opportunity to bring our constituents' concerns to the House of Commons. Now, as the member for Bolton has said, the history of the region is intertwined with our own, and it's very important that we take account of that. And that is why we do have regular interventions in Parliament on this important topic. And the member for Stoke-on-Trent Central mentioned that we hadn't spoken enough, but I do remind him that he did come to the human rights debate, adjournment debate in December, where he made points, and also there have been a number of other interventions and questions on this in the written questions. So on the issue of human rights in Kashmir, we recognise that there are concerns in both India-administered Kashmir and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. And I want to reassure the honourable member for Perry Barr and Middlesbrough, who said that human rights are paramount. The UK government encourages all states to ensure their domestic laws are in line with international standards. Now, a number of members have mentioned journalists' freedom of speech, and I want to ask the member for Sheffield Central if she would be happy if I wrote back to her specifically on the woman who she mentioned, so that I can provide details and indeed put a copy of the letter back to her in the library so that we can follow up directly on her case which she mentioned. But our position is clear that any allegation of human rights abuse is deeply concerning and must be investigated thoroughly, promptly and transparently. The member for Birmingham Hall, Green and Moseley said, as he said, it's important to ensure effective and constructive dialogue with the communities affected. And that's the role here for members of Parliament, to raise concerns where we have them, and then for our government to raise them with the governments of India and Pakistan. Now, as members here will be aware, as the Indo-Pacific Minister, I tend to have my interlocutors in Delhi and other places, and the High Commission here, and of course the member for Lincoln, who's the member for who overviews the work of the FCDO with Pakistan, Afghanistan and the Middle East, also raises regularly with his interlocutors, and we do bring forward these concerns. The role that we undertake very diligently, of course, is monitoring the situation and recording concerns. We understand, for example, that several restrictions have been put in place over time in Indian-administered Kashmir, and many members today have raised the point about internet blockouts, and that is something which we do monitor very carefully and something which we ensure we raise effectively. and unfortunately they tend to spike at times when there are violent outbreaks. Now, on the importance of human rights, the member for Walthamstow mentioned the important Amnesty International report. Other members have mentioned the work of Mary Lawler, and we are clear that the importance of human rights being respected, and indeed we need to call for all remaining restrictions imposed since the constitutional changes in August 2019 to be lifted as soon as possible, and for any remaining political detainees to be released. Some members mentioned prison conditions, and this goes to the heart of that issue. We welcome reports that some detainees have been released, but we remain concerned by ongoing detentions. More broadly, the government notes that the people of Indian-administered Kashmir used their collective voice with a 64% turnout in the State Assembly elections last October. 64%, I might add, is higher than local government elections in the UK. In State Assembly elections last October, in what was largely a peaceful electoral process, and that the State Legislative Assembly in Srinagar has now been restored. Some members have raised the revocation of Article 370 of the Constitution. And regarding the revocation of Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, the UK Government stands by our long-standing belief that any resolution should consider the wishes of the Kashmiri people. For this reason, we continue to urge both sides to ensure that there is constructive dialogue with affected communities. We're clear on the importance of rights being respected and continue to call for all remaining restrictions imposed since the constitutional changes in August 2019 to be lifted as soon as possible for any remaining political detainees to be released. The UK is aware of the Indian Supreme Court's judgment on the validity of the Article 370 revocation. Where we have concerns, we raise them directly with the Government of India. Yes.
I thank the Minister for replying so detailed to the specific points raised, and I fully accept that the government and her counterparts are raising the 370 suspension with India. Is she able to tell the House what the Indian response was, or share some detail of the importance with which India took that intervention from the United Kingdom?
Well, I think the point is this is a frequent agenda item, and I think without wanting to go into private discussions, the fact that we raise it, that constituents raise it with the members here, and that we then relay that, that's as transparent as we can possibly be. And as ever in foreign policy, it's almost impossible to control the response of our interlocutors. Having done yesterday's urgent question in the House, if I could control my interlocutor's response, I would be in heaven. Meanwhile, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act and the Public Safety Act, which many members raised, when it comes to those legislations, the UK government encourages all states to ensure that their domestic laws are in line with international standards. Any allegations of human rights abuses must be investigated thoroughly, promptly and transparently. Now, the members for Huddersfield and Sheffield Central and Rochdale have talked about communications restrictions and also the worrying situation for journalists. And it is wonderful to have a journalist in the House having such effective interventions in speeches and with such a heart for his community.
Mind back to the statement before that one, and the Shadow Minister referred to it. Is there perhaps a role for the Special Envoy to play in relation to religious discrimination and abuses that are happening there? And if so, the Honourable Gentleman who has that position, there's no better person, I believe, and we all believe, to do that job.
Of course, and the work of envoys, the work of the United Nations is very important data and up-to-date analysis. But the Foreign Office also has a role in terms of visits to the region. And it's really wonderful the way our heads of mission are able to go into these parts. And some members have mentioned a journey which UK members of Parliament made some years ago where they were blocked entrance because some areas are simply too violent, too difficult to enter and are not safe enough. And so the fact that we have our own teams who are able to give us up-to-date guidance whether it's an envoy, whether it's United Nations or our own staff. That's the way we keep up to date. Now, I wanted briefly to touch on freedom of religion or belief, because it's an issue which the member for Strangford raises regularly, and also our Shadow Minister has mentioned the importance that it plays within the Chamber. And I wanted to reassure the members that when I visited Delhi, I was able to meet with Hindu, Christian, Sikh and Muslim communities to hear about the different traditions in the region, including a very impressive visit, which made a huge impression of me when I visited the Jama Masjid, which is one of the most ancient religious sites in Delhi. I can see he wants to intervene.
Thank the Minister for graciousness and let me come in a second time. I mentioned in my contribution about the Ahmadiyya Muslims who in particular are suffering from persecution just simply because they're a different kind of the Muslim religion. Has the Minister had an opportunity to discuss with them the levels of persecution that they're enduring?
I think he's referring to the Ahmadiyya, and I think this is mainly an issue in the region in other parts. And with his permission, I'll take that back and ask the member for Lincoln to write to him with more detail. Dr. Alin Khan, the UK government is aware of the reports of the detention of a number of journalists, getting back to the point that I made with the member of Rochdale. The government is clear on the importance of human rights being respected and continues to call for any remaining restrictions to be lifted as soon as possible and for any remaining political detainees to be released. Now, the member for Stoke-on-Trent Central raised the issue of the UN plebiscite, and I wanted to feed back on that. For those who ask what the UK's position on a UN plebiscite is, it's been the long-standing position of successive UK governments that it's for India and Pakistan to find a lasting political resolution on Kashmir, taking into account the wishes of Kashmiri people, and it is not for the UK to prescribe a solution or act as a mediator. That doesn't mean that...
Just on that point, so does the Minister, or can the Minister confirm if adherence to human rights and international law are conditions that are or will be included in any trade agreements with India?
Of course, trade is the property of the Department for Business and Trade, but I do want to reassure him that we remain committed to the promotion of universal human rights. Where we have concerns, they're raised directly with partner governments, including at the ministerial level. And I know that the member for Huddersfield also raised the question of trade. So human rights is like a golden thread which goes through all the work of all the international departments in the government, and the issue which sits alongside that, which is a particular debate this week because of the announcement on international aid. Could I reassure the House that we're still doing an assessment of the impact of that in the Indo-Pacific region, and that when we have a clearer picture we will come back. As members will be aware, it's very intertwined, the work that we do with other donor countries. So, for example, USAID, which traditionally across the globe is a very big partner in aid. Because of the announcement recently regarding the cessation of aid, what we've asked the department to do as ministers is to do an assessment in the coming weeks so that we can understand what's the impact of aid more generally and the reduction of aid more generally in different regions. And of course, for me as the Indo-Pacific Minister, I want to know exactly what impact that's going to have. But that work, because the announcement is less than a week old, has not yet been completed. Now, I wanted briefly to touch on our visits to the region as a government, because the benefit of having our expertise in country means that when it's safe to visit, when various permissions need to be sought and gained, that can be done. And the government has the monitoring of the situation of India-administered Kashmir as part of its duties, engaging with people from different areas and travelling to different regions, including the Indian-administered Kashmir, as a very important part of our diplomacy. And we will continue to do this. Despite controls being in place, officials from the British High Commission in New Delhi monitor the situation and visit the region periodically. Officials from the High Commission in New Delhi do request access to Kashmir and monitor it. The travel advice of the FCDO currently advises against travel to certain parts of India-administered Kashmir, and all travel within 10 miles of the line of control, whether in India-administered Kashmir or Pakistan-administered Kashmir, is advised against. We encourage all British nationals visiting the region to follow that advice very carefully, including our own staff. There are limits, therefore, to the frequency and geographical scope of visits. Now, the same applies for our officials at the British High Commission in Islamabad, who travel periodically to Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Now, I briefly wanted to touch on a couple of other issues which were raised by members, but I'm getting very close to the end of the debate, and could I ask if I have missed anything? I would just like to say one thing which I really enjoyed about this debate, which is how many local organisations, whether it's the youth organisation in Rochdale, which was mentioned by the members, whether it's the impact of councillors in our localities, whether it's the important work during International Women's Day, where we can celebrate the work of our representatives who have deep connections with the area. This is the sort of work that is the tapestry of the UK, and I think it's so important that we bring these matters to the House to reflect constituents' concerns. I'll take the member for Berry, and then I'll bring in the member for...
Thank you, Minister, for such diligent responses to the debate. Is it reasonable, does she think, that constituents of mine hope that within a period of the next 4.5 years, one single parliament of this Labour government, that things will have progressed as opposed to simply being rehearsed and repeated, notwithstanding the sincerity with which she is feeding back? Has the government got a clear objective to move things forward, to move the dial on this timeless issue?
Well, I thank the member for his question, and I want to impress upon him the importance of these debates to bring influence to the work that we do in the FCDO, so that we can go back to our teams, and it's on the public record, the work that is being done in our communities, and through that it can have a lasting impact, I believe. I think we do have to remember, though, that we do strongly hold to that principle of that important role that India and Pakistan have got on their resolution of this. Yes.
I thank the Minister for being so generous with her time, and I just want to pick up on the point she said about it's not for the UK to prescribe a solution. I entirely understand why that's the position that she and previous governments have had. But in 1948, there were 8 votes in favour of the special resolution on the Security Council. The USSR at the time abstained. The UK was one of the countries that voted in favour of that resolution that said a plebiscite should happen. So is it that the UK no longer supports the position that we adopted in 48, and I appreciate that was a long time ago, or is it that we think that's a potential solution, but actually we don't necessarily want to push it?
Minister. Our position that it is for the two to take charge of the overall situation, but obviously listening to the wishes of the Kashmiri people.
Thank you very much. It's a follow-up point, really. I'm grateful to the Minister. Is the position, as it stands under international law, which is very clear, there is a United Nations resolution that gives the birthright of the Kashmiris to self-determination. Does the UK government support that position? I think that's the question.
Well, obviously, our position is that in order to resolve it, because in a way, a wish and a prayer is one thing, but to resolve this, it will definitely come down to the two partners and listening to the wishes of the Kashmiri people. And we are here to support, to monitor the human rights, but as has been very clear in the debate, we cannot prescribe or take charge or dictate the terms of that. And so,
I appreciate very close to time. Can I at least ask that in any interactions with the Indian government, you push that they prosecute those men who use rape and sexual violence as a tool of oppression, because they are not being prosecuted at the moment. Thank you.
Dr. Alin Khan, the point that she makes is very important because it's International Women's Day on Saturday, and regardless of where those awful crimes happen, we will always take the violence against women and girls, and it's one of the Foreign Secretary's priorities, extremely seriously, and raise that with whichever government has that as one of the things which is currently happening in their area. Dr. Alim Khan, thank you so much for your patience in chairing the debate, and I think we will come back to this topic.
The question is that this House has considered government support for human rights in Jammu and Kashmir. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order.